I think I have this romantic idea of childhood, the idea that like when you're a kid, you watch animated shows, that's the thing you do. But the numbers are telling us that something new is happening. Children are ditching traditional kids shows and watching amateur YouTube content instead. Today on the show, how kids TV is changing. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. You know, I hate to pull it back in my day, but look, I'm going to do it. Back in my day, you'd get home from school, you'd toss your backpack somewhere and probably forget where it is, and then you turn on the TV and then you hear something like this.
Who lives in a pineapple under the sea?
SpongeBob SquarePants!
Absorbent and yellow and porous is he.
SpongeBob SquarePants!
If not a-
You would. That's what you went to. But if you're a kid right now, life looks a little bit different. For instance, you'd be more likely to grab your iPad and then find something like this.
So I am about to attempt a wakeboard in this river while getting pulled behind my Tesla. Here we go. Yo. Oh. I honestly have no idea if this is about to work. All right, hit it. Oh my God.
First, let me just say, love SpongeBob, shout out SpongeBob. It is difficult for a cartoon sea sponge to compete with a guy flying down a river on a wakeboard being pulled by a Tesla. You just cannot compete with that. But the numbers are telling us that kids are abandoning traditional children's TV because they're turning towards amateur creator content on YouTube. So what does that mean? What does that mean for the future of kids' entertainment and also for kids themselves? Kayla Cobb is here. She recently did a deep dive on this phenomenon for The Wrap. Kayla, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, of course. Listen, let me just start by asking you, what was the catalyst for the reporting on the state of kids' TV in this particular moment?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to clarify, I don't have kids of my own.
Okay.
That's always a common question I get.
Yeah.
But I do have a young cousin, and I'm someone who has covered the TV industry for almost a decade of my life. And I was on vacation with him recently, and I watched that he just consistently watched YouTube. There was no SpongeBob. There was no, not even Bluey, no Paw Patrol. It was all YouTube videos.
Wow.
And I'm like, this is fascinating. So as someone who has staked kind of their career on the future of television, I was like, this is for sure something to monitor. And then my associate editor, Adam Chitwood, has children, and he was like, let's do it. Let's get into it.
Okay, so I like this idea of following an instinct as a reporter. Of like, something's happening here. You know, I see this might be a story. And then you start to dig into the trends and into the sort of like a larger sort of concept that's going on here. So what are the most dramatic stats and trends that you end up discovering when you dig into it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first I want to clarify that, we typically cover the states. So all of these are kind of like from the United States metrics. But it's no surprise that linear TV is in decline. But seeing exactly how far it's fallen in the children's space was truly shocking. From 2016 to 2023, linear viewership on Nickelodeon dropped to 86%.
86%. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And then Disney Channel, 90%.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
Yeah. It's just, they are not watching it. Just period. End of sentence.
I guess the numbers I end up expecting in these moments are like, it dropped by 15%, and that is a crisis. 90% is a whole kind of other thing. I got to ask you, YouTube has been around for 20 years. It's not a particularly new phenomenon. When you think about the ways that he's sort of taken over the children's entertainment space, what's changed in recent years, you think, that has allowed it to become this magnet for younger viewers?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that YouTube, things that do well on the YouTube algorithm tend to be very splashy, very loud, kind of ridiculous. The wakeboarding Tesla thing that you highlighted is a good example. Yeah. And all of those things really appeal to children. So there's that. And then what YouTube offers that a lot of it takes a very long time for an episode of SpongeBob to get made. That's just sure. The animation pipeline takes a while. But it doesn't take nearly as long to create something like an episode of Blippi or Miss Rachel. So what YouTube offers is this nearly endless stream of content. And if you're a parent who's trying to entertain your kids, it seems like a win-win. And also YouTube is on your phone. It's on tablets. It is exactly where your child is at all times. and it's very easy to access just from a like technological perspective versus like figuring out the kids section of the Paramount Plus app, or, you know, navigating like the Netflix section. So it's just kind of a lot of factors have come together to make it the new reality.
When you kind of like step back for a moment and try to imagine, you know, stepping into the shoes of your young cousin, what do you think it is about the stuff, the creator content on YouTube that holds more appeal than the animated shows that we're sort of relatively familiar with on traditional TV?
Yeah, I think part of it is just like a lot of these creators are kind of speaking the language that he's grown up in. You know, this is a generation that has never not known the internet, has never not known YouTube.
Yeah.
So I think that goes a really long way. And then you mentioned in our discussion beforehand, Bluey's like very short runtime. These episodes are typically very short. They're very concise. And I think that also helps, is just like it's kind of catering to their attention span. And yeah, I think that's kind of what it is. And there are animated projects on YouTube from YouTube creators that do very, very well. Cocomelon's an example of that. But by and large, like the live action stuff can be like turned out very, very quickly and get to them. It's just so fast.
I am, first of all, I just want to note that, like, for parents who are listening right now, you know, like hearing names like Blippi and Miss Rachel, they're like, oh, those are celebrities in our house, right? Like, those are celebrities to a lot of parents because, like, they know their kids, like, know to ask for those YouTube channels kind of by name. But also, I think, like, we've mentioned Bluey a couple of times. And if you guys don't mind, I'm just going to play a little bit of Bluey because I think it's worth listening to a bit of audio from that show. Let's hear it.
Okay, let's go!
Now that was much better, Bluey. You didn't interrupt, you let me know you wanted to talk, and you waited till I was ready. Well done.
Thanks.
I still just need you to be more patient though, okay?
Okay. I just find it hard to be patient.
I'll give you a hint. Next time, just watch what your sister does.
Okay.
High five. Ooh, itchy neck.
Dad.
I think it's worth talking about Bluey for a moment because Bluey is, to me, like a signal of something that is working, right? Like the Bluey is this, for people who don't know what Bluey is, it's an Australian animated show about a family of dogs. It became the most watched television show in the US in 2024. I don't mean among children's shows. I just mean it's the most watched show in the United States in 2024. That's a big deal. And I think, like, as we sort of talk about this conversation of like the slipping grip that traditional animated shows have on children's attention, you also have this counter world where Bluey announced this week that they're making a Bluey movie that's going to come out in 2027. And that's like really exciting. You know, like that's a significant deal in my house, you know? And so I guess I want to sort of like counterbalance the two things of, on the one hand, you have YouTube content that has kind of risen all the way to the top. But then there's something about Bluey's ongoing success that tells us that, like, some things can still thrive in this YouTube era of children's entertainment. What do you think it is about Bluey that makes it work in that way?
Yeah, Bluey has a lot of things that really, I guess, going for it. First of all, it doesn't talk down to children.
Yeah.
I think there is like you see this a lot with just children's entertainment. The shows that don't kind of talk down to kids, who aren't condescending to them, typically tend to be a bit more successful.
Yeah.
Kids are incredibly intelligent, and sometimes I think that's forgotten a little bit. Aesthetically, it is just really beautiful.
So
it's
rich,
great
yeah.
animation,
Yeah.
soothing colors that like it's bright and it's fun without being too overwhelming for younger viewers. And then there is a part of Bluey that is like it you know, they're about 7 episodes in length, or 7 minutes in length an episode.
Yeah.
And typically for younger viewers, they do not have the attention span to understand subplots. So they can only comprehend one plot at a time. So that is really helpful. And it's helpful because, like, it's so short. It's such a concise little story.
Yeah.
Parents like to watch it as well. So it becomes this, like, parental family bonding thing.
Kayla, I got to
So-
tell you, in my house, I sometimes put on Bluey, and my kid is not even the one who's watching it. You know, it's just me sitting there like, I need to watch a couple episodes of Bluey. Kayla, I appreciate you shedding light on this trend. I am going to try to watch out for what my kid is watching on YouTube, because that is a road that I've tried not to travel down as much as possible. But I'm a little worried now. So thank you for bringing this here. I really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for the time.
Yes, of course. Kayla Cobb is a senior TV reporter for The Wrap. She was speaking about how amateur creator content on YouTube has impacted kids' TV. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, we're going to switch gears here and get at a story we've returned to quite a bit in 2024. It is about this ongoing rift in Canadian literature. This year, we've spoken with people who continue to support the Giller Prize and with people who are boycotting it because of its lead sponsor, Scotiabank, and its investment in an Israeli weapons manufacturer called Elbit Systems. We've had an author on the show who has signed a letter in support of that boycott, but we have not spoken with any of the authors who are leading the CanLit response campaign and who speak on its behalf. That is a group that wants the Giller Prize to end its relationship with Scotiabank because of its investments, among other demands. Noor Naga was shortlisted for the Giller Prize in 2022 for her debut novel, If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English. She's part of CanLit Responds, and I spoke with her about how much has changed over the past year. Here's our conversation in full. Noor, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Elamin.
Of course. Can I start with the tagline for CanLit Responds? The tagline is no business as usual in CanLit. To what extent is business as usual in CanLit?
Oh man, I don't think there's any going back. I really feel this last year has been a big turning point. I mean, when the protesters first disrupted the award ceremony a year ago, we had over 2,000 people, 2,000 writers in Canada and other book workers sign on in support of those protesters and in support of the Giller Foundation dropping the charges against them. That is a not insignificant number. For this year, 37 eligible authors withdrew their book from consideration this year. And you have to understand that you have a book that takes years to write, and then you have this one opening where it's only eligible for 1 year. So it's actually quite a small portion of writers in CanLit who are eligible each year. And we had sort of 37 writers sign on in a very public way to say that they are withdrawing their book from consideration in protest against the prize's funding. Last month, we had 365 authors and book workers pledged to boycott the Giller Prize for the foreseeable future until they cut ties with Scotiabank, Indigo Books, and the Israeli Foundation. So that is significant. And then there are all kinds of people who maybe didn't sign on publicly, but are still withdrawing their labor in all of these different ways. So I think that the results of this campaign have been just a total turning point in how the entire CanLit community thinks about its relationship to these larger literary structures and prize culture more broadly. People are looking for alternative structures. So, some of the models that have kind of erupted include the No Arms in the Arts book tour, which has had a number of events in the last year. Some of them book clubs specifically designed to uplift some of the works that authors withdrew. And the conversations there have been absolutely incredible, bringing together all of these writers who took a moral stance and decided not to participate this year, and then giving them this platform to not only share why they decided to make that move, but also giving them a chance to talk about their books. So there's been all these alternative support systems that are springing up, that are grassroots, where people are coming together to say, we want to connect over shared values. We want to have literary structures that reflect us and that support us. So yeah, I think a lot of that has, it's been really inspiring to see. And I think it's changed the CanLit landscape for good.
You were nominated for a Giller. You were on the shortlist for a Giller. That changes your life, I think, in a certain way. So I just wanted to ask you how maybe that experience might have impacted your experience as an author, just to sort of situate the idea like this is what authors are sort of opting out of.
Yeah, I mean, so I was shortlisted in 2022. It was my debut novel. It did replace the book tour. I didn't have a book tour. My publisher didn't organize one. And so it kind of, the Giller tour ended up being the substitute for that. So it did give me a lot of publicity. It's hard to sort of measure these things.
Sure.
I don't know that it was kind of life-changing. I don't know that the book would have had a very different life had it not been shortlisted, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think that more than anything, when I saw the news a little over a year ago now, that protesters had disrupted the 2023 gala with this information, my immediate thought was, this is why I was shortlisted a year ago, in order for me to do something about it now. And that comes with a huge onus of responsibility. And so, when I think about, young writers who are entering into this publishing market for the first time, there is a lot of fear. And I think a lot of them think that a whole lot is riding on these prizes. And if I can just bust into one of these prizes, it's going to make or break my career. And I don't think that's true at all. And I think that, while I completely understand that anxiety and the publishing industry gets tougher and tougher each year to make a mark, that's not most writers' journeys. That's not how it happens,
Yeah, I take seriously the idea that we are sort of in a flux moment when it comes to prize culture, because literary prizes have been around for a long while, but also I think our relationship to those institutions has changed over time. While that relationship maybe shifts, because I think you're talking about the idea of Canadian literature kind of being in this place where some people are asking different questions of what they want out of prizes. You've outlined some of the things that the campaign has achieved. What would you say has been lost? Like what's been the cost in terms of maybe on a personal level, like friendships, relationships? How have those shifted over the past year?
To be perfectly honest, speaking from my own point of view, I haven't lost anything. I understand that might not be the case for other people, but I have only gained community. Frankly, like I have gotten to know all of these writers that I had absolutely no connection to, in genres that I don't necessarily read, in parts of the country that I don't have I've never been to. I don't know what goes on in those literary scenes. Yeah. And instead, I've sort of been able to suddenly connect with all of these writers from different walks of life who share the exact same values that I do. And so for me, it's been really wonderful, and there hasn't been any professional backlash of any kind whatsoever. It's only been positive and absolutely inspiring.
I've experienced, I think, both ends of that. I think I've heard from authors on both ends of that relationship. The idea that the being a part of the campaign has made them connect to a larger community, and then also people have said, like, you know what, the very existence of this campaign has fractured or weakened some relationships with some people that I used to hold like really dear to my heart, or I have a hard time talking to people who are involved in the campaign, and maybe there's like this mythology of like a CanLit scene that is uniform, that is like has always sort of existed in harmony, and this event is like its large sort of fracture. And maybe that has always been a myth. But also, I think a little bit of what you're saying is that actually CanLit, whatever notion that is, might be stronger because of this, because of like the ways that these relationships have maybe formed. Is that what you're trying to get at? Okay,
so you weren't asking me personally. You were kind of speaking more broadly about how different writers have.
I was asking you personally, but it sounds like for you that has not particularly been a fracture point. So, I want to also like reflect that for some people it has.
Right. I mean, I think that one of the things that is also pretty glaring is that there is a big there is a generational gap that we're seeing. And a lot of the writers who are taking the most risk with signing on to these campaigns are young writers who are the most vulnerable and who have the most to lose. And a lot of people who are really holding on to these institutions are people who have benefited over an entire kind of lifetime. So there is a kind of old guard feel that I get from a lot of kind of big who are refusing to speak publicly, even if privately they support the tenets of the campaign, but are refusing to speak publicly, frankly, out of cowardice and out of fear that it will have some kind of negative impact on their careers, or maybe fracture some of the relationships that they have, that they've kind of built over the course of a lifetime. Whereas, a lot of younger writers have shown a lot more courage, frankly. I mean, on the one hand, they have less to lose because they're fresh and they're kind of just entering this market. But at the same time, I think that they've really shown a lot of integrity and bravery.
I think the idea of cowardice and fear being associated with an old guard or being associated with a class of authors that we respect or look up to, I think that's a difficult thing to navigate. I think like if you sort of, hold a certain writer in certain esteem and this event becomes something that makes you see them in a different light, that can be something that's difficult for some people to navigate. Do you feel disappointed about some prominent writers and the way that they have responded to the campaign, do you think?
Oh, yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, it is. It's been very painful to see writers whose work I respect and writers that I know personally who I've learned so much from, who I've had as mentors and friends and peers, strong ethical, political dimensions, who are often kind of writing these narratives in which, the whole idea is to speak truth to power and then to sort of behave in these ways that are just so completely counter to the ethos of that. I find it, it has been really disappointing to see.
I want to go back to the achievements of the campaign because Scotiabank, as I mentioned, they've drastically reduced their holdings in Elbit Systems, right? And for a while, it seemed like the Giller Prize was maybe going to end its partnership with Scotiabank, but instead they ended up issuing this statement. The statement is, following a thorough review and a deep consultation with members of the literary community, the Giller Foundation Board has agreed that our partnership with Scotiabank will continue. That landed as a surprise for a lot of people. How did that land for you when that happened?
Well, I think it was especially surprising because, in the days prior to that statement being issued, they had given Giller-affiliated authors a completely different impression. And a group of former winners actually pooled together their own money and offered it to Elena as an alternative.
Alana Rabinovich runs the Giller Foundation.
Yes, they offered it to the Giller Foundation and said, look, the Giller Foundation has been around for a long time. You don't actually need Scotiabank. The prize can sustain its reputation, its symbolic place in CanLit. It can continue to function without this, the glitz and the glamour, and we don't actually need that. We are offering you from our own money a smaller pool, but it can be no less powerful. Do the right thing. And she initially said that she was going to do that. And then she turned around the next day, sorry to make this about her, but frankly, she's made it about herself, but turns around the next day and issues a statement like that. A lot of writers felt deeply, deeply betrayed because the Giller Foundation had been offered a concrete solution. So people say, what were they supposed to do? How are they going to function without Scotiabank? Actually, an alternative was provided, and they decided to turn it down. So it really speaks to what the values of the organization are. And that's been really disappointing, especially when it's an organization that champions itself as being, social justice oriented. All the books that they champion are sort of, it really runs in the face of everything that they claim to stand for.
Okay, you said a lot there. I just want to contextualize some of it. So the stuff that we know from reporting that has been made public, I think Richie Asali's reported some of this in the Toronto Star, Josh O'Kane's reported some of this in the Globe and Mail, is that there was some conversation between authors and the Giller Foundation in terms of how else to come up with the money, if not Scotiabank. Some emails between Alana Rabinovich and other authors were made public. I think the only author on the record is Madeleine Tien. Something shifted, and that's the part that you're sort of trying to get at, is that there was maybe movement towards getting further away from Scotiabank, whatever that conversation is. We have some record of that conversation happening, and then something shifted. I think there's enough speculation about the idea of the second letter from the campaign, not the first one, but the second letter from the campaign, which was the one that said, our ask is not just Scotiabank. It's also the Israeli Foundation, which is a foundation associated with Indigo, and also a divestment from Indigo. Like the relationship, it was sort of a more expansive kind of ask. And is that your read on the situation? The idea that the expanded ask of the campaign, moving from, hey, we'd like you to cut your relationship with Scotiabank, to, hey, we'd also like you to cut your relationship with Indigo and the Israeli Foundation. Do you gather that that was the turning point, or do you think it was something else? I mean, this is a difficult question to ask anybody because you're not that person. But do you have a read on why that change might have been?
No, I have no idea because, as the writers were all shocked because the impression we were given was really that the foundation was going to cut ties with Scotiabank. That was the impression that we were given. And so we were all blindsided by this. And so I don't know that was a response to the expanded demands. I really can't comment on that. I have no idea.
That's fair. There are critics who have kind of lined up to say, like, look at other cultural institutions. They're also sponsored by big corporations like Scotiabank, and they're maybe not getting the same level of vitriol or attack or criticism as the Giller Prize. And also, if it's not a bank, if you follow the money trail for a lot of arts organizations, not every arts organization, but for a lot of arts organizations, it'll eventually lead you to a place that it kind of feels uncomfortable. Yet these institutions don't seem to get the same level of criticism as the Giller Prize. Do you have a read as to why that is? Because this is a very focused campaign that says the Giller Prize is our problem. Our problem is not, Scotiabank Arena. It's not, other festivals sponsored by Scotiabank. Do you have a read as to why this campaign is so specifically targeted there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, there's still time. There's still time to organize something against Scotiabank, you know? I mean, I urge, you hockey fans, get out there, do some work, you know what I mean? The reason that writers have come together to speak directly to this is because this is our institution. It's an institution made primarily for writers to support their work. And I think that so many of us were horrified to discover that it's not an insignificant amount of money that Scotiabank had invested. A year ago, a $500 million stake made them the largest foreign investor in Elbit systems in the world. This little Canadian bank happens to be the largest foreign investor in Elbit systems and the biggest sponsor for the arts in Canada. What does that tell you? It's a pretty glaring condemnation of how pervasive art washing in Canada is. So, I mean, the Giller Prize, it was the most obvious target at that time. And I just want to give you a sort of counterexample because, as you said, there are so many literary institutions and arts institutions across Canada that are complicit in different ways. And we are all complicit in different ways if you kind of follow the money for far enough. Yeah. But I just want to give you the counterexample of the Griffin controversy from 2015. I don't know if you remember this. There was a similar whistleblowing moment by Michael Lista. He wrote an amazing piece of investigative journalism for Canada Land in which he revealed that Scott Griffin had major investments in the arms trade to Saudi Arabia at a time when Saudi Arabia's human rights abuses were at an all-time high, and there were all of these writers who were being persecuted for practicing freedom of speech. And this was in 2015, and very quickly Scott Griffin disinvested from these arms manufacturers, and the matter is done. The matter died immediately. There was no smear campaign. There was nothing. And so, I just want to sort of give you that model as a way of saying the Giller organization had options. And at the same time that there was this CanLit response campaign, there were all of these other conversations happening behind closed doors through email threads with not just the organizers, but with various writers who were involved to different capacities. So there has been a kind of a large effort being made across all of these different platforms. The campaign and the boycott, the latest boycott letter, this comes after an entire year of these demands falling against deaf ears. So it's not the first line of attack. It's really the end point once all of these conversations have failed and once all of these writers have been pushed out of the room and not been heard. So it's really it's the end point of a lot of frustration, a lot of disappointment.
I gotta say, Noor, like one of the tough parts of this job is considering a lot of different voices who are listening to this conversation and their points of view and asking questions on their behalf. And sometimes I'm asking questions on behalf of the most informed listener, and sometimes I'm asking questions on behalf of the least generous listener. But like one of the big criticisms of the campaign, which was a criticism that ran in the Globe and Mail, I think Stephen Marsh wrote a piece to this effect. And he said that like the thing that makes the Giller Prize controversy and the campaign different than the Scott Griffin one is that Ilana Rabinovich is in fact a Jewish woman. And so it makes targeting her a different story than the story of targeting someone like Scott Griffin. What does a campaign say to an accusation like that, or a listener who is thinking that is actually like what's going on here?
I think that question at this point is pretty offensive. At this point in the ongoing active genocide of Palestinians, I think that is a really offensive question. The Rabinoviches are actually irrelevant. Their religion is irrelevant. And I think it's just it's a distraction tactic, frankly. And I think that a lot of organizers are getting tired. There are so many Jewish Canadian writers who have stood up, who have signed this campaign, it's just a ridiculous question. And it's also really frustrating, frankly, to see journalists play devil's advocate with this question.
I don't think I'm playing devil's advocate with that question. I think what I'm doing is reasonably trying to say that like someone who's listening to this conversation, that's the only thing they're hearing. Let's
not make room on the air for it. Let's not make room on the air for a ridiculous question that is a diversion. And now that you've put it out there, now maybe it's in somebody's mind when it wasn't before. And it shouldn't be, because actually it's irrelevant. This distraction with anti-Semitism, the sort of boogeyman that keeps coming up every time people lobby legitimate criticisms against organizations that are funding an active genocide, funding and profiting simultaneously off an active genocide, this is an irrelevant point to bring up.
I think the point that is more maybe relevant to bring up is that the Giller Foundation has said if it wasn't for Scotiabank, they wouldn't have the Giller Prize. What do you make of that statement, of them saying that?
Well, I just don't think that's true because they were offered an alternative. They were offered an alternative and they turned it down.
One of the comments is maybe about scale, right? Like about the idea of like, can they mount a tour across the country to sort of take office to different cities if they didn't have the sponsorship of Scotiabank? I don't know if the answer, I don't know if they can or can't do that. But also, I guess like that does not mean that the prize wouldn't exist. It just that it would mean it would be so changed. And that's what they're saying is like it would be a diminished prize.
I think that the value of the prize is not in its monetary impact. And I think that what has become of the Giller Prize this year, when you have all of these authors who have boycotted the prize, who have refused to participate, what does it even mean to win this year? I mean, to sort of echo something that Farzana Doctor, one of the eligible authors who withdrew their books this year, said recently, writers don't actually need it. We have been writing before the Giller Prize appeared, and we will be writing after the Giller Prize is gone. We don't actually need it, but the Giller Prize cannot function without authors.
When you think about the ways that the relationships have changed this year, when you think about the ways that at least certain people they've had a different relationship to an institution like the Giller Prize, to people who represent the Giller Prize or maybe advocate for the Giller Prize, do you see those relationships healing in any kind of way? Or is that maybe not the most pertinent question right now?
Yeah, I mean, the demands of the campaign are pretty simple. If the Giller Prize drops its partnership with Scotiabank and Indigo Books and the Israeli Foundation, then the campaign is dropped. So yeah, there can be no healing while the Giller Prize is directly involved in funding and profiting off a genocide. There can be no healing. Healing is for once you have corrected those wrongs, once you have cleaned your investments, then we can have a conversation, But up until then, there's really nothing to talk about because we have extremely different values, and the Giller Prize is not, I don't know what that conversation would look like. I don't know what the point would be.
Yeah, hard to imagine, the beginning of that healing road if you're talking about Be like, well, there's some significant obstacles before we even get to whatever that conversation looks like. Noor, do you want to add anything else before I leave you?
Yeah. If I can add one thing that I was sort of hoping would come up, and about the sort of material impact. I just want to add that it's really hard, when you're involved in collective action, it's often really hard to measure the material impact of what you're doing. And one of the really amazing things about CanLit Responds is that we do have direct evidence that it has worked. Because not just because Scotiabank divested about $400 million from its stake in Elbit Systems, but because the shares of Elbit Systems itself dropped over this last year. And the CEO of Elbit Systems cited Canadian activists in particular as being responsible for this. So you've got the CEO of a weapons manufacturer currently supplying the Israeli military as they carry out an act of genocide, citing a little group of Canadian activists for why their shares as a weapons manufacturer have dropped. So I just want to say, for those who are cynical, for those who practice this sort of whataboutism and, we're all complicit in different ways. And, what about all these other organizations? I just want to say, this is direct evidence that campaigns like this work. They have material effects in the world. And I think it's useful to remember that, because so many people are feeling jaded and are sort of asking this question of, well, what can I do? Well, this is something that you can do if you're a writer in Canada.
Noor, I think that is a good place to leave it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for being here, friend.
Thanks so much. Have a great night.
Bye. That was my conversation with Noor Naga, who's the author of If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English. She's a part of the CanLit Responds campaign. Look, before we go, I just want to talk about a moment of discomfort that I had in that interview. You probably noticed Noor forcefully reject the premise of the question I had about the group's critics. It's important for me to say, in retrospect, I wish I would have asked that question in a different way, in a way that provided more context to her and to you. The intent of that question was to get at what it says that the campaign is getting accusations of anti-Semitism. What does that reveal about the moment that we're in? And get Noor's thoughts on this. I should also mention Scotiabank subsidiary has since sold some of its stake in Elbit Systems. Noor mentioned that there. The bank has declined to comment on the protests, saying these divestments were based on investment merit and made independently of the bank itself. That is it for the show today. Listen, I also want to tell you about another conversation that is coming up on Commotion. It's coming up on December 31st. We are going to look back on the year that was in CanLit. You'll hear more on the fallout of the Giller controversy, yes, but also we are going to look at another big story, which is the death of Alice Munro and the revelations that came after, and how that changed not only her legacy, but I think also exposed some uncomfortable truths within CanLit. That is coming up on New Year's Eve. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. Hey, we'll see you tomorrow.